A salesman from the city was driving down a country road when he saw a sign out in front of an old shack that said, "Talking dog for sale." That got his curiosity up, so the salesman stopped and knocked on the shack's door. When the old farmer opened the door, the salesman said, "Okay, I saw your sign from the road. Tell me, do you really have a talking dog?" Well, the farmer led him out into the backyard where the salesman saw a very nice looking Labrador sitting under a tree. Goes up to the dog and says, "So, you talk?" "Yep," the lap replied. After the salesman recovered from the shock of hearing a dog speak, he said, "Okay, so what's your story?" The lab looked up and said, "Well, I discovered I could talk when I was pretty young. I wanted to help the government, so I told the CIA. In no time, they were sending me all over the world, country to country, sitting in rooms with spies and world leaders, because no one figured a dog would be eavesdropping. I was one of their most valuable spies for 8 years running. But all that jetting around really wore me out, and I knew I wasn't getting any younger, so I decided to settle down. Signed up for a job at the airport to do some undercover security. I'd wander around near suspicious characters and listen in and really uncovered some incredible plots and was awarded a whole bunch of medals. Then I got married, had a mess of pups, and now just retired." Well, the salesman was amazed. He turned to the farmer and said, "I'll take him." "That'll be $10, said the farmer. The salesman replied, "$10? Just $10? This dog's amazing. Why on earth are you selling him so cheap?" The farmer squinted his eyes and said, "That dog ain't nothing but a big liar. He's not done any of those things." The past few sessions, we've been talking about the importance of character. And if you missed those episodes, then after you watch this video, I encourage you to go back to our playlist and catch some of the other videos in the series. Character, as we've talked about before, reveals who we really are on the inside. If you claim to be a follower of Jesus, your goal should be for your own character to reflect that of Jesus. You've probably heard the expression about being a good judge of character. Well, how do we know if we're dealing with someone who has good character? For that matter, how do we test our own character to see how well we're reflecting Christ? Well, as we said before, who you really are will eventually be reflected in what you do and in what you say. So we're going to focus on what our actions reveal about our characters in another study. In this session, we're going to focus on what our speech reveals about our character. Jesus said our speech reveals who we really are. Once when Jesus was having a dispute with some other religious leaders, he turned to a crowd of onlookers and said, "Hear and understand, it is not what enters the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth. This defiles a person." Now, these particular religious leaders that Jesus was disputing were big believers that what went into people was the problem. They viewed sin as a form of contamination that came in from the outside. So as a result, they were real big on controlling what people touched, what people ate, where people went, and who people hung out with. You ever ran into any of that? As a result, these teachers gave the appearance of looking holy on the outside, but sometimes some of them what they actually produced was decidedly unholy, in the form that these teachers often were critical towards those who failed to measure up to their standards of purity. And that led to their speech tending to be either condemning or condescending towards others. Now, familiar? You ever run into people like that? In contrast, Jesus treated sin not as a contamination that came from the outside, but as a corruption that affected us from the inside. There's something broken inside each of us that's reflected in selfish and destructive ways. Think of our souls as like a mirror. Genesis tells us that God created us in his image, kind of like a mirror intended to reflect back his glory. However, that inner mirror has been warped by the human tendency to rebel against God, as well as the side effects that go with that sin, such as the trauma we experience as a result of our own self-centeredness, or the trauma we experience as a result of the self-centeredness of other people, because we live in a fallen world. So as a result, what is reflected out of us is often warped. And what comes out of us often reveals much about what's really going on inside of us. Think about how you speak to other people. Think about what you say and also about how you say it. Is your speech rude? Is it caustic? Is it critical? Does it tend to be controlling or condemning? What are the things that are coming out of your mouth revealing about what's really going on inside you? The Bible's clear that our words have the potential for both great harm or great good. As Proverbs 18:21 tells us, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Those who love it will eat its fruit. Along those same lines, James, the half brother of Jesus and a leader in the very first church there in Jerusalem, gives us one of the classic descriptions of the power of our speech. In James 3, verse 2, he begins by saying, "For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he's a perfect man, able to rein in the whole body as well." In other words, every single one of us is guilty of using words destructively. Come on, admit it. He also goes on to tell us that the ability to control one's mouth is one of the measures of our progress on the path to spiritual maturity. And then James goes on in verses 3 through 5 to say, now if we put bits in the horse's mouth so that they obey us, we direct their whole body as well. Look at the ships too. Although they're large and driven by strong winds, they're nevertheless directed by a very small rudder wherever the inclination of the pilot determines. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. So here we see that our tongue can dramatically impact both our lives and the lives of others in ways greatly out of proportion to its size. In verses 5 through 8, James continues, "See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, the very world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our body parts as that which defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of our life and is set on fire by hell." And maybe you've run into speech that seemed like that caused such devastation and destruction. He goes on to say, "For each species of beasts and birds, of reptiles and creatures of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by the human race. But no one among mankind can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison." This reminds us that careless words can be incredibly destructive. Such words are easy to say, but nearly impossible to take back. There's an old story about a father whose daughter had a real bad habit of spreading negative, cutting, and often untrue remarks about other people. And when confronted about the problem, she'd just shrug it off and say, I was only joking, or, I really just can't help myself sometimes. One particular windy day, the dad had had enough of his daughter's behavior. So he grabbed a feather pillow and he said, "Get your coat, let's go outside." Once they got outside, he cut open the feather pillow and he shook it to the wind. Of course, that allowed all the feathers to just fly free. And then he turned to his daughter and said, "Okay, honey, you pick up all those feathers and put them back in the pillow." Well, she protested. She said, "Father, that'd be impossible. The wind's carrying the feathers everywhere. I'll never be able to gather them all back in." Her father looked her straight in the eye and said, "So it is with your word. Once they've flown, the damage is done. Be careful what you set free from your mouth. Once set free, the wrong words can wreak havoc." Going back to James 3, verses 5 and 6, James compares the power of our words to a fire. A few years ago, our area got to see firsthand the devastation that can result from raging wildfires. It turned out that many of those blazes started out as careless sparks, just spread the wrong way. Similarly, a careless word from our lips can quickly spread into a figurative wildfire that devastates and destroys our relationships with other people. In verse 7, James suggests it's easier to control wild animals than our own tongues. Imagine hiking through the mountains and coming face to face with a great bear in the wild. And sometimes our speech can be just as uncontrollable and unpredictable as a wild beast. In verse 8, James compares careless words to poison. Now, poison gets inside of us and then begins to spread its ill effects. Over time, the poison eats away at its victim from the inside. And our words can do the same thing. Think about some of the negative, critical, condemning things that have been said to you. Those things ever just pop back into your head? You ever hear those voices coming in when you least expect them, just trying to tell you about your failures and your mistakes? Think about some of the unkind, condemning things maybe you've said to somebody else in a time of anger. You think those words may come back to haunt them as well? You ever seen your own words act like a wildfire or a wild animal or a deadly poison? Now, we'll come back to James in a moment. But first, let's consider what our speech reveals about our inner character. As we said before, our words help reveal what's truly on the inside. Words can give us clues into the character of other people, how they talk, how they treat others with their words. Words can also give us understanding about our own character. Now, the type of speech that there's a type of speech that reveals ungodliness in one's character, and it's characterized by things, first of all, like crudity. Ephesians 5:4 warns us there must be no filthiness or foolish talk or vulgar joking, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. Now, let's face it, we live in vulgar times where crude and coarse speech are often taken for granted. Even Christians can indulge in such things. A lot of times we think, well, it's really no big deal. But consider how often such speech either dishonors God or more likely even demeans other people. Now, a speech like that is really unbecoming of someone who claims to be a child of the King of Heaven. We should have no business coming out of our mouths. Even more concerning as a sign of ungodliness in a person's character is speech that's characterized by contempt. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus taught, "You have heard the ancients were told, you shall not murder, and whoever commits murder shall be answerable to the court. But I say to you that everyone who's angry with his brother shall be answerable to the court. Whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be answerable to the Supreme Court. And whoever says, you fool, will be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell." You ever called somebody a fool before? Here Jesus equates insulting and belittling someone as being on the same level of actually murdering them. And Jesus' teaching is not without precedent, as some ancient rabbis reportedly taught that assassinating someone's character was the same as assassinating their person. Be careful when you have that temptation to reach out and belittle other people and demean them with your words. Perhaps the most damaging and ungodly thing that can come out of our mouths is falsehood. Proverbs 12:22 tells us, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. Those who deal faithfully are his delight. Lying lips are actually an abomination as far as God's concerned. Man, that's tough. And the Bible, especially the book of Proverbs, is full of warnings against those who traffic in lies, slander, and misinformation. Jesus was responding to some critics in John chapter 8. They had been criticizing him for claiming God as his heavenly Father. And so in John 8:44, listen to this response. You are of your father, the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Whenever he tells a lie, he speaks from his own nature because he's a liar and the father of lies. But anyone who traffics in falsehood is most definitely not reflecting godly character. Indeed, quite the opposite. So stay away from falsehood, slander, and lies. Now, what about the type of speech that reflects godliness in our character? Well, let me throw out some things to you to consider. Seek for your words to be, first of all, inviting. Proverbs 16:24 says, pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. Also, seek for your words to be edifying if you want them to reflect godliness. Ephesians 4:29 tells us, let no unwholesome word come out of your mouth. But if there's any good word for edification according to the need of the moment, say that. So it'll give grace to those who hear. So let your words be for building up people, not tearing them down. If you're concerned about godliness in your character, seek for your words to be gracious. Colossians 4:6 says, your speech must always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person. Now, I don't use a lot of salt, but those of you who do, why do you salt your food? Because it enhances the flavor, right? Well, does your speech actually enhance life for other people? Does it make them thirsty to know more about God and what he's done in your life, let your words be gracious. Also, seek for your words to be discreet. Proverbs 17:9 says, one who conceals an offense seeks love. One who repeats a matter separates close friends. Now, that doesn't mean covering up gross sins or letting people get away with committing great sins. What it means is not when people come to you and they confess to you their sins, when they are open and honest and raw with you, that they're able to trust you, that you're not going to run off and repeat those deep, dark secrets to other people. That would not be the loving thing to do. If you really love somebody and they confide in you, you need to show them that you're trustworthy. So that's what it means to conceal an offense, and terms that is seeking love. Be discreet in your words. Also, if you're concerned about godliness in your character, let your words be humble. Proverbs 27:2 says, let another praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips. Remember what we talked about last time. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Also, seek for your words not to be characterized by falsehood, but seek for your words to be true. Proverbs 17:7 says, excellent speech is not fitting for a fool, much less are lying lips to a prince. Listen, if you're a follower of Jesus, you've been adopted into God's family. You are a child of the Most High King, and you need to act like it. You need to remember everything you say and do reflects back on your Heavenly Father. And so God doesn't deal with falsehood. There is no falsehood in God. There shouldn't be any falsehood in us as well. So let your words be true. And then finally, seek for your words to be healing. Proverbs 12:18 says, there's one who speaks rashly like the thrust of a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Are your words bringing healing into the situation? Are they bringing peace and relief to those who hear them? That is a sign that we are seeking to be peacemakers, that we're seeking to be children of our Father, as we build people up and bind their wounds, strengthen and encourage them. Now, there's a lot more we could say. In fact, if you've probably picked up on this, there's a lot in the book of Proverbs itself that talks about our speech. And I encourage you to spend some time in that book. Maybe go look up everything it has to say about our speech, because there's dynamite in there about wise, helpful speech. Now, what if we consider all this and what we see about from our speech, what that reveals about our character, is a little concerning to us. Maybe we don't like what we see. Well, what do we do about that? Going back to James chapter 3, in verses 9 through 12, James says this about our tongues. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who've been made in the likeness of God. See the discrepancy there? He goes on to say, from the same mouth comes both blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, these things should not be this way. Does a spring send out from the same opening both fresh and bitter water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, bear olives, or a vine bear figs? Remember what Jesus said about you shall know them by their fruits? James says, nor can salt water produce fresh. So what he's saying there is if you want to change the speech, you have to change the source. And that begins by admitting we're powerless to bring about this change on our own. Instead, we have to turn to Christ in faith, ask for his help, and begin to walk with him daily. And it's as we pursue this personal relationship with Jesus day by day, learning from him, submitting to him, and relying on his power, that he will begin to transform us from the inside out. That's one of the reasons we're doing these videos. And I encourage you to go back and watch the rest of the videos in this series, because that's what we're talking about. How to walk with Jesus day by day so that he transforms and shapes our character into that reflection of his glory that was intended to be. And as he transforms you from the inside out, you'll notice a difference in what comes out of your mouth as well. I once knew a person who was extremely caustic and critical. Now, this person often meant well and had a good heart, but other people found it nearly impossible to get along with this individual. Finally, a major confrontation took place between this person and some other people with whom they were trying to collaborate on a project. It came to the point where a lot of the other people in the project refused to take part as long as this particular individual was involved. It was an ugly, nasty scene. Now, a lot of people who experience that kind of pushback would become bitter and resentful, but you got to give them credit. This setback led this individual to do some major soul searching. I came to find out later that a significant amount of this person's critical personality was the result from a stern childhood under a very demanding parent, along with some other deep wounds from the past. So as this individual began to turn more and more of those old hurts over to the Lord, an amazing transformation took place. Over the course of several months, the old abrasiveness gave way to someone who was much more relaxed, much more forgiving, much more at peace, and a lot more fun to be around. And watching that transformation take place was a great reminder of what God's able to do when we walk with him day by day in faith. We let him in to do what he wants to do inside of our life. In what ways has God transformed you? How has your speech changed since you started following Jesus? Let's talk about it in the comments. You can also ask questions or post a prayer request. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe so you'll be notified of our next session. And if you don't mind, please like and share this video with your friends as well so other people can enjoy it. Until next time, keep walking with Jesus.